What's your story? Let's hear your version of what you think happened, Missy.
I think I was new to town. I think I needed a good review. I made some bad choices. I'm not proud of it.
Imagine standing on a red carpet in 2026, surrounded by Hollywood's elite, and suddenly, the air just changes. That was the moment Melissa McCarthy stepped out at the Fashion Trust U.S. Awards, and every camera snapped like history was repeating itself. Gone was the quiet styling of the past, replaced by a bold, sculpted presence that felt intentional. But this wasn't just weight loss. It was a statement years in the making. What really changed? And why now? And what did everyone miss the first time around? The anatomy of a transformation. They say the camera adds 10 pounds, but in April 2026, the camera couldn't seem to find anything but a woman who had literally shed the weight of an entire industry. Because when Melissa McCarthy walked into the Fashion Trust U.S. Awards, it was not just another celebrity red carpet moment. It felt like a reset button had been pressed on how we see her. The room did not just notice, it reacted. Heads turned, conversations paused, and for a few seconds, it was like everyone was silently asking the same question. What just happened? Now, here is where it gets interesting. This was not a subtle change. Reports around that time pointed to a weight loss of somewhere between 75 and 95 pounds. That is not a tweak. That is a full recalibration of presence, posture, and perception. And yet, what made it hit even harder was not just the number. It was how she chose to show it. She stepped out in a curve-hugging Emilio Pucci gown that did not hide anything. It did the opposite. It highlighted everything. The lines were sharp, the fit was deliberate, and the message was loud without saying a word. This was not about blending in. This was about owning the space completely. And here is what people missed. The dress was not the story. It was the announcement. Think about it for a second. For years, Melissa McCarthy had been styled in a way that leaned towards safe, flowing, sometimes even deliberately distracting from her shape. That was the industry formula. Keep her funny. Keep her lovable. Keep her in a lane that audiences already understand. But in 2026, that formula quietly broke. The gown did not just fit her body. It reframed her identity in front of millions watching. Suddenly, the funny sidekick image started to crack, and something else stepped through. Something sharper. Something more controlled. Fans noticed immediately. Social media did not just react, it exploded with comparisons. People were saying she looked years younger. Others pointed out how confident she seemed, like she was not just wearing the dress, but commanding it. And then came the deeper reactions, the ones that go beyond surface-level compliments. Was this still the same Melissa McCarthy people thought they knew? Or had the industry been showing us only one version all along? Because here is the uncomfortable truth that sits under all of this. Hollywood has always had a habit of putting actors into boxes. Once you are labeled the funny one, the system rarely lets you step outside that role without resistance. And for years, Melissa owned that lane so well that people forgot she could be anything else. But now, with this transformation, something shifted in how she was being perceived. Not necessarily who she is, but how the world interprets her. And that difference matters more than most people realize. Can you picture the sheer audacity of walking into a room and looking 20 years younger than you did a decade ago? Not because of tricks or lighting, but because of discipline, change, and timing. That kind of moment does not just happen overnight. It builds quietly behind the scenes while the public is distracted. And that is where the real story starts to form. Because when people saw that transformation, the first reaction was predictable. Questions started flying. Was it a strict diet? Was it intense workouts? Was it something more? Assisted? The internet loves a shortcut story. It wants the secret, the hack, the one thing that explains everything. But what if the truth is far less dramatic and far more uncomfortable to hear? Before we go there, look at the setting again. The Fashion Trust U.S. Awards is not just any event. It is a space where style, influence, and perception collide. Walking in there with a transformation like that is not accidental. It is strategic. It is controlled. It is a moment chosen, not stumbled into. And that choice tells us something important. This was not just about losing weight. It was about timing the reveal in a way that would hit the hardest. And it did. Because now people were not just talking about her comedy or her past roles. They were talking about her presence, her look, her range, her future. Which brings us to a question that cuts a little deeper. Do you think Hollywood treats actresses differently the moment they stop fitting the funny and safe image? And if that is true, does a physical transformation actually unlock new opportunities? Or does it just expose the bias that was always there? Because if you look closely, this moment is doing both at the same time. It is opening doors, but it is also revealing how those doors were controlled in the first place. And the more you think about it, the more you realize this transformation is not just physical. It is psychological. It is professional. It is cultural. It is a shift in how one person is allowed to exist in an industry that quietly decides who gets to evolve and who stays the same. So now the question becomes even bigger than the dress, the weight, or the headlines. What actually caused this level of change? Because if the result is this dramatic, the method must be extreme, right? Well, what if her secret is actually the most boring thing you have ever heard? The methodology of letting go. In a world of Hollywood magic, shots, and fad diets, Melissa McCarthy decided to do the one thing that actually terrifies her peers. She stopped trying. Not in a careless way, not in a give-up way, but in a very specific, almost rebellious way that goes against everything the industry quietly pushes. Because while everyone else is chasing fast results, strict rules, and miracle fixes, her approach in 2026 sounded almost boring. And that is exactly why people don't believe it at first. Because when reports started breaking down how she actually lost around 90 pounds over time, the answer did not come with a shiny product or a secret injection. It came with something much slower, something much less exciting. A lifestyle shift that focused on movement, consistency, and something most people ignore completely: stress. And here is where the story flips. The transformation did not start with her body. It started with her mind. Instead of extreme dieting or punishing routines, she leaned into something called piloxing. It is a mix of Pilates and boxing, which sounds simple until you picture it. One moment, you are tightening your core with controlled, almost slow movements. The next moment, you are throwing punches, releasing tension, pushing your heart rate up. It is strength and release happening at the same time. Now think about what that does. Not just physically, but mentally. Because boxing is not just an exercise, it is emotional. It gives you a way to let things out without saying a word. And Pilates brings you back into control, into balance. So instead of fighting her body, she was working with it. And that's the part most people miss. This was not a battle. It was a reset. According to recent reports around early 2026, her weight loss was gradual. It did not happen overnight. It was not a shocking drop in a few months. It stretched over time, quietly building in the background while the public was focused on other things. That slow pace matters because it tells us this was not about chasing a number. It was about building something sustainable. But let's address the question everyone was whispering. Was it Ozempic? Because in today's Hollywood, That question shows up almost instantly whenever someone transforms this dramatically. The internet loves a shortcut explanation. It wants a clear answer, something it can point to and say, "That's it. That's the reason." But Melissa herself has pushed back on that kind of thinking. She has spoken about how overanalyzing every move, every calorie, every detail actually made things worse. Instead of helping, it created pressure. And pressure creates stress. And stress, as it turns out, might be one of the biggest hidden factors in weight gain. So what happens when you remove the pressure instead of adding more? That is where things get interesting. Because her approach in 2026 was not about obsessing. It was about letting go of that constant mental noise. Less overthinking, less chasing perfection, more consistency, more listening to her body instead of trying to control it like a machine. And yes, it sounds almost too simple. If I told you the secret to a 90-pound transformation was basically hitting a heavy bag, staying consistent, and lowering your stress levels, would you believe it? Or would you still feel like there has to be something else behind the curtain? Because we have been trained to expect complexity. We have been trained to believe that big results must come from extreme methods. But sometimes, the extreme part is choosing not to follow the chaos everyone else is stuck in. And here's a question that might hit a little closer to home. Have you ever noticed that the harder you try to force a change, the more your body pushes back? It is almost like the body resists pressure, like it knows when something is not sustainable. And when you finally stop forcing it, things begin to shift in a way that feels natural. That does not mean it is easy. It just means it is different. Because consistency is not flashy. Managing stress is not exciting. Showing up again and again without dramatic results at first is not something people celebrate. But over time, those small, quiet choices start stacking up. And then one day, you walk into a room and people barely recognize you. Not because you changed overnight, but because they were not paying attention while you were building the change slowly. And that brings us back to that red carpet moment. That was not the beginning of the transformation. That was the reveal. A reveal built on months, maybe years, of doing the most unglamorous work possible. No shortcuts, no dramatic announcements, just a shift in how she approached her body and her mind. But here is where the story takes a slightly darker turn. Because timing matters. And the moment she chose to show this new version of herself was not random. Why did this transformation become public right when she stepped into a much heavier, more serious role? Because suddenly, this is not just about weight loss anymore. It is about image, perception, and the kind of roles Hollywood decides you are ready for. And once you see that connection, you start to wonder, was this transformation purely personal, or was it also strategic? Let's go deeper. The unspeakable pivot. You know her as the woman who can make you cry laughing, but in 2026, Melissa McCarthy is betting her entire legacy on making you just cry. Because once you look past the red carpet moment, past the dress, past the transformation headlines, you start to notice something bigger happening behind the scenes. This was not just a physical change. This was a career pivot, and not a small one. It was calculated. It was timed. And it was risky. Melissa McCarthy stepped into one of the most emotionally heavy roles of her career, playing Patsy Ramsey in the true crime anthology Unspeakable. And if you know anything about that case, then you already understand the weight of that decision. This is not comedy. This is grief, scrutiny, pressure, and a story that has haunted public memory for decades. And here's the part most people didn't connect at first. The transformation and the role were not separate events. They were They were moving together. Because when you step into a role like that, especially in a prestige drama, everything changes. The expectations are different. The audience is different. Even the way the camera looks at you is different. Comedy gives you space to exaggerate. Drama demands precision. It demands control, subtlety, and a kind of presence that pulls people in without saying too much. And that kind of performance often comes with an unspoken rule in Hollywood. You have to look the part. Now, that may not sound fair, but it is real. And in this case, her transformation aligned almost perfectly with this shift. Reports confirmed that she was not just starring in the project, but also serving as an executive producer. That changes everything. Because when you're the executive producer, you're not waiting for permission anymore. You are part of the decision-making. You are shaping the story, not just reacting to it. And that means this transformation was not just personal. It was professional. It was strategic in a way that most audiences never get to see. Think about it. For years, Melissa McCarthy has been one of the most successful comedic actresses in Hollywood. She built an entire career on timing, energy, and characters that people instantly connect with. But success can also become a trap. Once the industry knows what works, it keeps asking for the same thing again and again. So the real challenge is not becoming successful. It's breaking out of the version of you that made you successful in the first place. And that is exactly what this moment represents. Because stepping into Unspeakable is not just about acting. It is about rewriting how casting directors, producers, and audiences see you. It is about proving that you can carry emotional weight, not just comedic timing. And here is where it gets even more layered. The story of JonBenet Ramsey is not simple. It is filled with public judgment, media pressure, and years of unanswered questions. Playing Patsy Ramsey means stepping into a role where every expression, every reaction, every silence will be analyzed. This is not a performance people watch casually. This is one they study. So imagine carrying that level of emotional responsibility while also revealing a completely new version of yourself to the world at the same time. That is not a coincidence. That is alignment. Because now, when audiences see her on screen, they are not just seeing the comedian they are used to. They are seeing someone who looks different, moves differently, and carries a different kind of energy. And whether we admit it or not, that changes how we receive the performance. Which brings us to a deeper question. Can a comedian ever truly be unseen as funny? Because once people associate you with laughter, it sticks. Even in serious roles, there is always that moment where the audience expects a joke, a break, a release. And removing that expectation takes more than just acting. It takes a shift in perception. And sometimes, perception shifts faster when appearance changes too. That is the part people do not like to say out loud. But it is there. A physical transformation can act like a signal. It tells the audience, this is different. Pay attention. And suddenly, they do. So now the question becomes even sharper. Is it easier to lose 90 pounds? Or is it harder to lose the comic label that Hollywood placed on you years ago? Because one is physical, the other is psychological, and the second one often lasts longer. Melissa McCarthy is now standing at that exact intersection. A new look, a new role, and a new level of control behind the scenes. This is not just evolution. This is repositioning. And once you see it that way, the transformation stops looking like a surprise and starts looking like a move. A move that was built quietly, revealed strategically, and tied directly to a moment that could redefine her entire career. But to fully understand why this moment feels so powerful, you have to go back. Way back. Back to the point where the industry first decided what she was allowed to be. Because before the transformation, before the control, before the red carpets and executive titles, there was a label. And that label changed everything. Let's rewind. The 20-year retro rebellion. Long before the red carpet started whispering her name in a different tone, Melissa McCarthy was quietly rewriting the script no one thought she could escape. Not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily, like someone building a secret door in a house everyone else thinks they understand. Think back for a second. Early 2000, the world meets her through Gilmore Girls. She plays Sookie, warm, chaotic, lovable, the kind of character that makes you smile without trying. But here is the part most people missed. That role came with invisible rules. Be funny. Stay in your lane. Do not cross into leading lady territory. And that was not just a suggestion. It was an industry contract nobody signed, but everyone followed. For almost 2 decades, Melissa existed inside what insiders call the body box. Hollywood had a quiet system. If you looked a certain way, you got romance, depth, and complexity. If you did not, you got punchlines. Simple as that. But here is where things get interesting. She did not fight the system directly. She studied it. Then came 2011. The explosion. Bridesmaids hits the world like a thunderclap. Biggest comedy of the year. Massive numbers. And Melissa's performance? Unforgettable. Wild. Fearless. The kind that steals scenes and refuses to give them back. Everyone was laughing. But behind that laughter, something else was happening. While the world saw chaos, she was building control. Because here is the truth, most breakdown videos skip. That success could have trapped her permanently. Typecast, recycled, turned into a predictable machine of the same character in different outfits. But Melissa did something very few actors managed to do. She started shifting roles behind the scenes. Slowly, quietly, she moved from just acting to producing. From being directed to influencing direction. From being the joke to shaping the story. What looks like a career glow-up today actually started years ago, piece by piece, decision by decision. Some people call this strategy. Others call it survival. I call it the silent shift. The ability to evolve without announcing it. And here is where the retro rebellion really kicks in. Back in the early 2010s, when media pressure around weight and image was at its loudest, Melissa did something unexpected. She refused to play along with public diet narratives. Interviews from that time show her pushing back, not aggressively, but firmly. She did not let her body become a marketing storyline. And that matters more than people realize. Because when you refuse to let the industry define your before, you gain control over your after. Now fast forward to 2026. People are zooming in on before and after photos. Headlines are loud. Transformations are being analyzed frame by frame. But if you really trace the timeline, this was not a sudden change. This was a 20-year setup finally paying off. Her physical transformation is getting attention, yes. But the deeper shift started long ago, when she decided she would not stay the funny friend, when she chose to build power instead of chasing approval. Do you remember the first time you saw her on screen? Did you see a future executive producer of a major true crime drama, or just someone there to make you laugh? Because that is the gap she has been closing this entire time. And now, with projects everything connects. The weight loss, the serious roles, the shift in tone, the control behind the camera. It is not random. It is not overnight. It is a long game reaching its final phase. the industry did not suddenly change its mind about her. She outgrew the box they put her in. That is a completely different story, because one version says they finally accepted her. The other says she stopped asking. And those are not the same ending. Now we are looking at a woman who can move between comedy and heavy drama, who can lead projects and shape them, who can decide how she is seen instead of waiting to be seen differently. That is not just a transformation. That is leverage. And it raises a bigger question most channels are not even touching. What if the real transformation has nothing to do with weight at all? What if the biggest shift is invisible, something you cannot capture in a before and after photo? Because in the next chapter, we are stepping into that exact idea. The quiet rebellion. The one move she made that everyone is watching, but almost nobody is actually understanding. The unburdening insight. Here is the truth that no one else is telling you. Melissa McCarthy didn't lose weight to get roles. She lost weight because she finally got the power. And once you see it like that, everything clicks into place. Because for years, the story being sold to the public was simple. Eat less, move more, glow up. But that version feels incomplete. Almost like watching a movie with half the scenes missing. What actually changed wasn't just her body. It was her position in the system. And when your position changes, your pressure changes. Look at what started happening behind the scenes. Melissa wasn't just showing up to sets anymore. She was helping shape them, producing, deciding, choosing what stories get told and how they get told. That shift matters more than any diet plan ever could. Because think about it. When you are constantly being judged, boxed, labeled, and reduced to one version of yourself, your body carries that tension. Not just mentally, but physically. Stress becomes part of your daily routine. And stress does something very specific. It locks the body in survival mode. And a body in survival mode does not transform. It protects. So what happens when that pressure finally lifts? What happens when you are no longer fighting to be accepted, but deciding what gets accepted? That is where this unburdening begins. Reports around her recent red carpet appearances show something interesting. Yes, people noticed the physical change. The slimmer figure, the sharper styling, the confidence. But if you look closer, what stands out even more is the energy. There is a calm control there, a kind of quiet ownership that was not always visible before. And that is where the real shift lives. Transformation isn't about what you eat. It's about what you stop swallowing. For years, Melissa was swallowing expectations, swallowing typecasting, swallowing the idea that her value was tied to being the funny one. And when that stops, when you finally say no to that script, your entire system resets. Now let's talk about the how, because this is where most people get confused. You will hear about workouts like piloxing, which blends Pilates and boxing. You will hear about lifestyle changes. And yes, those things matter. But they only work when the internal environment changes first. Because if your mind is still under pressure, your body resists change. But when autonomy enters the picture, something different happens. Autonomy lowers stress. Lower stress changes hormones. And that opens the door for real physical transformation. It becomes less about forcing results and more about allowing them. And that idea connects directly to something Melissa has hinted at over the years. Self-acceptance, not as a slogan, but as a mechanism. When you stop fighting yourself, your body stops fighting you. So this isn't just a weight loss story, it is a powerful story disguised as a physical change. And that is why so many people are missing it. They are focused on the before and after photos, the surface, the visible. But the real shift happened in boardrooms, in contracts, in decisions most people never see. The where of this transformation is not just the gym or the kitchen. It is Hollywood itself. The system that once boxed her in is now something she navigates differently, with leverage. And the why becomes clear. She did not change to fit the industry. She changed once she no longer had to. Let me ask you something. If you had full control over your life story, what is the first burden you would drop? Because maybe the thing holding people back is not effort. Maybe it is the environment. Maybe it is the constant pressure to perform, to fit, and to survive inside expectations that were never designed for them in the first place. And here is the uncomfortable question. Is your current environment quietly stopping your own transformation? Because Melissa's story suggests something powerful. That change becomes easier when resistance is removed. And sometimes that resistance is not inside you. It is around you. Now look again at the version of her we are seeing today. The confidence, the control, the physical change that seems almost effortless from the outside. It is not random. It is not luck. It is the result of unburdening. And once that burden is gone, the body follows. So as we step into the final piece of this story, there is one question sitting right at the center of everything. Is this just Melissa McCarthy's personal evolution? Or is she quietly showing every woman in Hollywood exactly how to rewrite the system from the inside? Melissa McCarthy didn't just change her look. She rewrote the rules quietly, step by step. She became healthier, wealthier, and more powerful by stepping out of approval mode and into control. That's the real shift. Not weight, not trends, power. What makes her transformation stand out is the intention behind it. A steady decision to prioritize herself over expectations and outside noise. It wasn't loud, dramatic, or attention-seeking, but it was deeply effective. So tell me, did her journey push you to drop your own burdens? And which Melissa era is your favorite? If you want more hidden Hollywood truths, subscribe for more insights and stories that reveal what really happens behind the spotlight and beyond the headlines we usually see every day online and in media spaces today. Keep questioning the narratives presented to you and look deeper into the choices that shape real influence and lasting change.